The first thing we're going to discuss is how to sound jazzy. This is perhaps less obvious than it may appear, for there are two fundamental components to a good jazz sound. On the one hand, there is what you play, the kind of chords you play, for instance. Take an E chord, the way you would play it in a pop tune, and then use a jazz voice in. You immediately hear it, it sounds jazzy. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but this sounds jazzy right away. And the same obviously goes with solos, but we'll spend this entire course talking about what to play. Now, I would like to spend a few minutes on how you play, since this is equally and perhaps even more important in creating a good jazz sound. First, let's dispel a mega myth. I want to play jazz, so I need a jazz guitar. Perhaps one of those big jazz boxes. So let me grill some $5,000 on a Gibson L5 and I will sound jazzy for sure. Or at least a semi-hollow. So I better get myself a 1969 Gibson 335 that costs like a family car. Wrong, wrong and wrong again. I know I'm talking to guitarists who are amongst the worst gear freaks, but this is most definitely a myth. The truth is that a good, credible jazz tone does not depend on the guitar, on the pickups or the amp. 80% is in your hands and 20% in your pick. The sooner you will realize this, the faster you will progress. A friend of mine here in Glasgow gets the warmest, smoothest, the most luscious jazz tone you can think of out of a Telecaster. And we all know that it is the twangiest, trebliest, the thinnest sounding guitar ever made. And I could go on and on with examples spanning any make and model of guitar. The bottom line is always the same. So stop this video, pick up whatever guitar you have available now and plug into any amp. Then start the video again. The first thing we want to be looking at is comping. Yes, I know. We all play guitar because we want to solo, but the reality is that if you're playing in a band, even a jazz band, you will spend a lot more time comping than soloing. So let's get some useful pointers. First of all, you want to set your amp for a neutral tone. All EQ setting I suggest in the 12 o'clock position. You can make adjustments later if you want, but now it's important that you get as a neutral tone as possible so that you can fully appreciate the difference your touch can make. On the guitar, you want to use the neck pickup, with the tone controlled rolled off somewhat, maybe 1/3 of the way, half of the way. Now, if you want to use the pick, remember that in jazz you will use mostly, almost exclusively downstrokes. This is mandatory in older styles like gypsy jazz, what the French called la pompe. But even in more modern jazz styles, you will be playing by and large downstrokes. So pick any chord you like, ideally halfway up the neck, and experiment. Yes, that is the key. Your aim is to produce a smooth, consistent tone through quick downstrokes. So take your time, quite some time if necessary, and experiment. Move your right hand towards the neck first, then in the center, then towards the bridge, and you hear the sound changing. A very round and smooth tone on the neck, a balanced tone in between the pickups, and a very trebly, nasally sound on the bridge pickup. Then experiment with different kinds of arm and hand movement. For me, what works best is to generate most of the movement from the elbow, keeping the wrist pretty straight and with only minimum hand rotation. But here again, you have to find your own way. Even small changes in the strumming technique can have a huge impact. Take time then, invest time. It's time very well spent. Only when you're satisfied, make a mental note of the strumming technique you're using and make sure that you use that from now on. Finally, the pick. How you hold it and how you attack the strings. Let me touch upon this damn thing here for a second, because as I already said, at least 20% of your whole tone depends simply on what kind of pick you use. Not convinced? Try yourself. Get as many picks as you want and try to use exactly the same picking or strumming technique with each one. The difference in tone is absolutely massive. In the 40 years I've been playing guitar, I've spent a ridiculous amount of time just trying out different picks. And then a few years ago I seem to have settled on two models. A Fender Heavy, the black one, if you want a slightly darker tone, and a Dunlop 1.14 millimeters if you want a slightly lighter tone. Here again, I'm afraid that you will have to take time and experiment yourself. My advice in any case is to avoid anything thin. I would say as a rule of thumb at least 1 millimeter thick. But remember also that the material the pick is made of has even more influence on the tone than its thickness. So experiment, that's the key. Observe carefully the changes and settle on what you like. Finally, and all importantly, the way you actually hold the pick. I will deal with this in depth when we will talk about soloing tone, so I'll leave it at that for the moment. I will just suggest that in general you do not attack the strings at a right angle. Okay, that makes for a very distinct, very attacky sound for all the strings. Rather, I would position my hand and fingers in a way that the pick slices slightly through strings. So. But then again, this is entirely your choice. So now, let's take two chords you know for sure and experiment. I suggest D minor 7 and G7 in their simplest form, right? The bar chords. There's a reason for choosing these particular two, but we'll see that later in the course. As you experiment with positions, techniques and attack and your picking and everything, let me share a little secret with you. It helps sound jazzy if you're, for instance, playing fours. Very banal, but if you approach your target chord from half a tone above or half a tone below, it immediately sounds more jazzy. Let me show you. Now, are there other comping techniques? Well, personally, I hardly ever use my pick when comping. Because of my love for Brazilian music, I very often use the thumb and finger technique of bossa nova. This helps me stressing the bass notes if there's no bass player. And still can be used without using the thumb for a lighter sound. So that my bass does not interfere with what the bass player is playing. If you want to learn this technique, there are plenty of good videos on YouTube. Just search how to play bossa nova and that will teach you the basics of the finger movements. You can then easily apply all that to jazz comping. Finally, another technique guaranteed to give you an instant jazz sound is to use your thumb. I kept this for last because this particular technique is my strongest recommendation for you. Yes, after all I've said about positions, pick and attack and all that, my honest advice is to put your pick in your mouth, as I do on stage, and use your thumb for comping. I know it looks horrible, but it sounds smooth, it sounds jazzy, and it's very, very easy to learn. jazzy is that?